Woo-hoo-hoo-hoo, the Golden Stallion, the Man of Tomorrow, Savzu, the Rated R radio star, here for something that I can't believe I've never done. I don't know how this never happened, but I will remedy this situation. Maybe I planned on it, being done as part of a series. So this will be part of a series. So to let you know what's going on here, this is going to be a Sovryn Top 8, and it's the Sovryn Top 8 for comic book movies. Now, in the past, and I still need to update these, there's so many things that needed to get released in 2017 that I just either I had to edit, or there were some other things going on with it, that I needed to do in 2017 or that I wasn't able to get to, that I want to make sure 2018, is just pure market saturation of Sovryn tech. Like that's just what this needs to be. So there's a lot of things that I need to make happen, and need to get out there and get released, and projects I need to finish, that I will be working on. So one of them is that I started a comic books top 8, where I was talking about not comic book movies necessarily, and maybe I've gotten asked this in like a Q&A, but I want to update this a little bit, even if I've already been asked it or if I went over it. So we're going to be doing a comic book top 8 here, a comic book movie top 8 in a minute. But before I do that, I want to let you know something kind of cool that I'm going to be releasing throughout January, and who knows, I might even expand beyond that with various things. But a lot of people don't know this. I used to do... or I think a lot of more modern listeners, I know not everybody has listened to the entire near 6-year catalog of Sovryn tech. And I used to do, before there was Patreon, literally before Patreon even existed, before there was a Patreon, before there was anything like that, sometimes I would do these shows that now I kind of make for Patreon, but I would do shows like this. I would do Sovryn Top 8s. I do all this stuff. And I mean, this is way, way back, starting in 2013, which, my mind feels like way, way back. And I'm going to be re-releasing the Sovryn Top 8s that I have done in the past, over the past few years, that were not part of Patreon, that were just available for free, and they'll still be available for free. That won't change. Okay. But I think a lot of people would really get something out of those. Because again, most people haven't listened back into the catalog, to find this stuff, but it's very much like Patreon style content that I do now. So I thought it'd be fun to put that out there. Of course, it's not going to get in the way of any, normal Patreon content that I put out. This is going to be bonus content, but it's also going to allow for new content in that some of the top 8s the classic top 8s that I'll be releasing from years ago, and really these are from 2013, 2014, something like that, maybe 2015, a couple of them. I'll be releasing those I'll be updating those. I'll do new Sovryn Top 8s for each of those conversations. Well, not all of them, but for a few of them. I'll be releasing, the first one will be the Sovryn Top 8 nonfiction books. And there's going to be a custom opening. I'm going to update and comment on everything that I said there. So, don't go listening to them now. You can just wait a few days and they'll be coming out, in the Patreon feed, and there'll be new content in each one. But I'll do, for the nonfiction books, I will do a 2018 version of that, because there's books that I would change when it comes to that. So you're going to get a lot out of this. There's going to be, some of them will just be fun to listen to the history. And believe me, it's pretty wild, because some of it I still use all of the really old. Way before I was using Supervillain as the theme song for the show. You're going to hear the really old theme songs and the outro music, all that stuff. In fact, you're going to hear, for specials, when I used to do Sovryn Tech specials, the opening music, it used to cut to, it would cut to the theme for the NWO. Literally for the New World Order, from WCW. And this is years ago. Anyway, you might find all of that fun. So that's all stuff that's coming. And part of that is to lead up to a lot of the conversations that we will be having with the user podcast, which will finally be coming out. So this is fun stuff. You got a lot of stuff coming out for you. I'm going to make sure, there's just so much content that people, and you take your pick. I think some people, they see, Sovryn Top 8 comic book movies. Well, I'm not really interested in that. I'm here for the tech. Well, you'll get your chance to hear some of the tech. In fact, listening back to some of these classic top 8s from years ago, there were top 8s that I had in mind that for whatever reason I never got around to. Like I never did them. Like there was the Sovryn top 8 which are computer books, like the top 8 computer books in history, or that still have relevance. I think that'd be a great one to do. So, if you're here for the tech, you can certainly get your hands on that too. But I think a lot of people, they really enjoy either more so than just the tech. They enjoy either the philosophy or they enjoy the geekiness. And of course, many of you enjoy all of that, but all that together. But so, that's the thing with Patreon. I know I have a lot of different types of listeners, so I make varied content. You don't have to consume it all. Okay. But anyway, so that's stuff that's coming up in really the next few days that'll be getting released. And it's kind of easy. It's easy for me because I get to record an intro for each one of those, and then I just put out the podcast, and hey, great. So, all right. So you're going to be getting Sovryn Rewinds. That's what we're going to call them. Sovryn Sovryn Rewinds. You'll be getting those. And again, they're a lot of fun. I mean, especially, you'll hear in the intros. I'll tell you all about each one as I do them. You're going to get those. We got user podcasts coming up. January alone is going to be phenomenal. And there will be more from Sovereign Tech First University. So you are getting loaded up. And look, you don't have to listen to them on the day that they release. I mean, just have the backlog, because there's going to be times or I imagine there'll be weeks where I only release like one episode. I mean, because the one thing that I guarantee on Patreon is the weekly Q&A. So you're going to get, those you're always going to get every Wednesday, or sometimes it has to come out on Thursday, but you'll definitely get one of those a week. But everything else is kind of gravy. And there's some days when, the gravy boat is a little low. Well, not really. It doesn't have to be. I wish I could do, you don't understand. I wish I could do this every day. I could. I have something to talk about every fucking day, certainly for an hour or a half hour or something. I mean, I could easily talk for that about just about anything without really rehashing. I wish, I'd love to do that. And we're not at that point yet. I'm not at that point yet personally, as far as being able to afford that kind of time. But I'm honored so many people ask me to do it, and I'm really honored that they do. So anyway, all that said, wow, long intro for for this whole shtick that we're going to do today. But this is it, the Sovryn Top 8 Comic Book Movies, the greatest, the top 8, in my opinion, the top 8 comic book movies out there. Now, here's the rub with comic book movies, is that while certainly, in recent years, it seems like, wow, there's like 3-4 comic book movies a year. You got to understand, since like 2008 or so, in the past 10 years, there have been more comic book movies made, I think, in the past 10 years than there were made in the entirety of the film industry before then, before 2008. There's just so many now. And admittedly, I'm sick of comic book movies. Like I really, Wonder Woman notwithstanding, and I'm kind of excited about Black Panther. I could do without these things because they have such a shitty ass formula that goes for them. And there's really usually not a whole lot on the line. When it comes to these films, like Winter Soldier, Captain America, Winter Soldier, that was pretty good. And it was something a little bit different, but so few of these things are sadly not very different. Doctor Strange still followed the Marvel formula. It just had a very interesting style to it. And that kind of made it a cut above. So, I mean, you can still make good comic book movies. I'm not saying you can't. It's just, I'm really already ready for the break. Like I'm ready for this to stop for a while. And then come back to it, because Justice League this year was rough. Thor Ragnarok, I wasn't the biggest fan of. Kind of go down the list on these things, and I find them to be generally boring, which is sad because a lot of what's going to comprise this list are really the comic book movies that changed the game, kind of the precursors to what we have now, that made it okay to even begin making what we have now. And what's sad about it is that growing up, in the 80s and 90s, which, by the way, I'm not complaining because, I consider it a great honor, and I feel very fortunate to have grown up in the 80s and 90s because I think you have a very unique and important understanding of the world. Not just me, anybody born in that time frame that has their wits about them. Certainly late 70s too. I think you've got a very unique outlook on the world that is disappearing and it needs to be, we're the people that need to speak up about shit. So, well, we don't need to. Needing would be a spook, but whatever. The point I was getting to is that in the 80s and 90s, we didn't really have a whole ton of comic book movies. I mean, yes, there were, we had TV movies, like there were the two, most people don't even know this, that there were Captain America TV movies back in the day. There was was it 93 or 91 or 93? There was the Captain America movie where he took on Red Skull. I mean, comic book movies have been around. I'm not saying they didn't exist, but they sure as fuck weren't taken as seriously. They weren't the major events that they are now. I mean, there's just nothing like it is today. There was really a dearth of comic book movies at the time, at least ones that, again, that had like the high budget, that were taken seriously and all that. I mean, it wasn't a thing. So that said, I mean, there's as far as like what are genuinely good movies, there's really not a whole lot of wiggle room. Like my list probably compares pretty well to just about anybody else's list, other than most modern Marvel films I would not put in like, I wouldn't put it in a top. Well, I mean, you couldn't help it, I guess, because again, there really are so few comic book movies compared to the amount of science fiction movies, sword and sandal movies, romance movies, whatever. Go pick your genre. Comic book movies, I mean, is still kind of nascent, right? So my list may not shock, but whatever. You're going to get my takes on these things. And well, hopefully you find it interesting. And as often happens with these top 8 lists or top lists that I put out there, they're not in any particular order until we get to the top 3. The top 3 are definitely in order. So, and again, this is comic book movies. Maybe I'll do like comic book TV shows, which is also used to be a very rare genre. Maybe not even not so rare as, say, comic book movies, but it was a rare genre. And obviously my number one comic book TV show, I mean, even if I were to make it, you already know what I'm going to say. It's going to be the 66 Batman. I mean, that fucking show is everything, was everything, will always be everything. It's just tremendous. So anyway, let's get into our Sovryn top 8 here, and we'll start breaking it down. Oh, but keep in mind too, none of these are animated films. That would be a whole other top 8, like the top 8 animated comic book films, which generally, for the most part, the animated comic book films are far better than any live action counterpart, save maybe one that I could think of where, well, anyway, I won't spoil that. So maybe we'll make that a top 8 too if people are interested, and you can message me on Patreon if you want to do that. So for the number 8 slot, again, up until we get to the first 3 or the top 3, it doesn't really matter. But let's get this one right out of the way. Iron Man, the 2008 Iron Man film. This is the movie. This is the reason. I mean, there's other movies that'll come before, and certainly we're going to talk about them, that made comic book movies viable, that even allowed for a movie like Iron Man to get made. But Iron Man's impact, Iron Man is the reason that we have the modern comic book film that we have now, like that we have the incarnation, the Marvel movies that we have now and all that. And each of which come with varying degrees of how well they're executed, in my opinion. Guardians of the Galaxy, the first Guardians of the Galaxy movie could have made the top 8. I have to give it that. Like that is such a unique, almost like side universe to the Marvel Cinematic Universe. That is a lot of fun. That could have hit it, because I mean that is a special piece of film right there. But anyway, Iron Man, this is a movie, and people have heard me tell this story before, but I know there's new people listening. So with Iron Man, I said, because you got to grasp this, okay? In fact, Collider, one of the things that inspired me to do this is that Collider is doing a top 50 comic book movies of all time. They've got to be covering, with 50 movies, they've got to be covering like every fucking movie, every comic book movie ever made, pretty much. But their list has been very interesting, to say the least. In fact, I don't think Iron Man's been on the list yet, or maybe it was. Anyway, it doesn't matter. I wouldn't be shocked if it was number 1 on their list. I already know what should be number 1 isn't number 1 on their list, but it'll be number 1 on mine. So anyway, Collider's doing it, and they even admitted in their little videos that they're doing about the top, every day, like they review another movie and they put it in its ranking. They made it very clear, which is good to hear, because I think most people just don't know. A lot of people are comic book fans now that have never been comic book fans, like ever. And now they just suddenly, oh, these movies are so great, and they're so into it, and maybe they're doing it with their kids or something, and now suddenly they give a shit about comic books. Or maybe they were comic book fans when they were kids, and, they skipped it for 20 years, and now they're back. Which, hey, fine. I'm not insulting anybody for that. But a lot of people, you do not realize this, and I've said this for years on Sovryn Tech. You don't realize this. Iron Man was a second-tier character. You were lucky if he was second-tier. Nobody really, you just did not know much about Iron Man. I mean, he kind of had the second-in-command position because he created the Avengers Mansion, with the Avengers under Captain America. But he was really there was times where there was not an Iron Man comic. Do you understand? I mean, this was a second-tier character. Nobody gave a shit about this character. I gave a shit about this character. For a long time, he was like my favorite Marvel character. Again, we're talking, 10, 15, 20 years before Iron Man the movie was even, a gleam in anybody's eye. Okay, I had my Iron Man tie, of all things. I at least was able to find one of those, like in one of those little center things in the mall, one of those little island shops in the mall. I had that. I loved the character of Iron Man. And what I knew, and I remember telling my friends this in high school, I said, the comic book movie that needs to get made, and this was after X-Men came out. That's why we were talking about it. I said, the comic book movie that needs to get made is Iron Man. I said, because this guy has all the personal tragedy in his life. He has all the problems. He has all the cool stuff. He can appeal to the Batman types and all that, which Batman has always done well, either on TV, animated wise, or in film. Has always done exceptionally well. Sometimes, people may think a certain movie's a dud, but in general, he's, the character of Batman has done very well. And Iron Man is in many ways Marvel's answer to Batman. In many ways. They're different characters in some respects, but it's really the answer to that. Which is why I found him appealing, because, I've always been such a big fan of Batman. And I said, it'll be the biggest movie of all time. I said, if they ever make an Iron Man movie, people are going to shit their pants. They won't believe what they just saw. And that's exactly what happened in 2008. I called it, and I've done this before. I said in 1998, I said, who'd make a great starship captain? Scott Bakula. What happens years later on Enterprise? Who's captain of the Enterprise? Scott Bakula. Fucking right. So I can call this shit all day long. But so Iron Man, in 2008, when that came out, it did exactly what I said it would. It had all the drama. It had the flawed character. It had what everybody was looking for. Had a tremendous story. It still had the problem of kind of a weaker villain, which is one of the major problems with comic book movies. And I think it's a problem, or particularly with Marvel movies. And I think it's a problem that is spread into, really sadly, because it's all Disney owned, that is spread into Star Wars, where the villains are being treated as weak sauce. Which is a shame, because Star Wars is actually great about delivering very impressive villains. And sorry, Kylo Ren, yeah, I get it, but you got to give me more. So anyway, so Iron Man certainly has that. Okay, so now actually I know Iron Man is not Collider's number one. So it has that flaw of the villain isn't exactly the best thing in the world. That is a problem across comic book movies. Why does this end up being such a thing? It's not all comic book movies. Like, you look at Batman Begins, Liam Neeson is tremendous, as, not Alucard, but Ra's al Ghul. Sometimes you can have a really great villain, but a lot of times it really doesn't come together that way. And often what I think could make the difference with a lot of these movies is if they had a really great villain. It could put them over the top, but it never happens. And I'm not exactly sure why that is. I could make some guesses, and I've hinted at them in the past, just that maybe, Disney's so afraid of kids seeing what villains, like having well-developed villains, suddenly they're going to realize that everybody in charge of the planet, be it Pizza the Hut in Washington or whoever is, wow, they're villains. All of our politicians are villains. They act just like these megalomaniacs, and all that. So I don't know, but that's pure speculation on my part. But regardless, so Iron Man, the 2008 Iron Man, this has to be on any top 10 list as far as comic book movies go. Again, it is the reason we have the modern comic book kind of, franchises going on, film franchises going on right now. I mean, it was that big of a deal, but it was that well done. I mean, Jon Favreau, totally delivered. And Robert Downey Jr., this guy was anathema at the time. Like, it was really anathema. Obviously, he fits very well into the Tony Stark character because in a lot of ways, he's kind of Tony Stark. He's had a similar, he can express those emotions and those traumas that Tony Stark has had because he's gone through, to some degree, he's gone through some of them. Gwyneth Paltrow was fantastic in this as Pepper Potts, which I would have picked somebody else, but she was great. I still think she was phenomenal. Pepper Potts is a very important character, especially in the comic books. Like when they did the rehash, again, also long before there was an Iron Man movie. I think they called it the Iron Age or something like that. There was this 2-issue, not a mini series. I'm not sure exactly what you'd call it, but like there was this 2-issue kind of trade paperback series that re-explored the origins of Tony Stark, of Iron Man. And in that, Pepper Potts, like that character really shines. It was a very, very cool little 2-issue. I mean, they weren't little comics, but a very, very cool 2-volume series, I guess I should say. So, and Iron Man got to take advantage of all of those different kind of rehashes and new origin stories that Iron Man had been going through, including with the Ultimate Universe and everything. I mean, it was really impressive. Iron Man, that's really all you need to say about it. Yeah, the story was great. I mean, the music was actually pretty cool too by, was it Ramin Djawadi? There was, nice little Easter eggs in the Iron Man film that kind of like hinted at a greater universe, which is always gets people way more enticed and way more excited and get them talking about a film because they get to speculate about, what's going to happen in the next film? Or, oh, wow, that was there. I wonder where Captain America is, there's his shield. What's the deal here? And I mean, and it really did a good job with that, with a lot of the Easter eggs and everything. It made it work. Iron Man is, again, the reason you have all the comic book movies that you're going to see over the past decade now. It is the one. Kudos. I mean, and not like Marvel wasn't making movies before then. I mean, you had that Hulk movie. There were quite a few different ones, and certainly Spider-Man was on a bit of a tear. But this solidified things. This really, changed it. And of course now with Disney owning 20th Century Fox, I mean, this is all going to change. I mean, now, there's going to be a huge Marvel universe. And I think, part of me, just to comment on that, I think Disney knew they needed to do this. To have the Marvel Cinematic Universe continue at the pace that it's going, if they want it to continue at the pace that it's going, I don't mind if they take a break, but they won't. They need the X-Men, right? They need, they need they got Spider-Man, but I mean, they need, they need all these characters. That's why they made the deal with Sony, right? They need all of these characters. They have to have that huge Marvel universe to allow for events like Infinity War and others to totally come to fruition. Pretty exciting times as far as comic book movies go. If fucking only shit would actually like happen and go bad and people would actually die and there'd actually be real tragic circumstances that would occur in these movies to where I could care about them. I mean, if I just want a good time with, my favorite comic book characters, I'll just read the goddamn comic books. I want the movies to be something special, to show me something that I'm not used to really seeing so much, or, because they don't exactly pay fidelity to the comic books, not really. So you got to give me something, and they just don't. But Iron Man, when that came out, I was so happy. I was so pleased. Iron Man 2 and 3, I love both of those movies as well. I think they're phenomenal. So, yeah, really, really cool stuff. The importance of this movie just cannot be understated. So there we go. There's number 8, Iron Man 2008. And wow, we're almost like in 30 minutes and we're early on the 8th one. So let's get on to the next movie. The next movie this is one that was pre-Iron Man and really very much stands alone as far as it's, where it's not part of any grand universe because it's based upon a character created by Dave Stevens, who was, like this character was very popular in the 80s and even before, and still comic books are made of this character. And most people, I don't even think they realize that it's a comic book movie, but it absolutely is. And that is 1991's The Rocketeer. Of course, with, starring Bill Campbell. Joe Johnston did the directing, did a phenomenal job of the directing. Jennifer Connelly's in it. This is really the first. Jennifer Connelly was in The Labyrinth, but this is the first time we really, audiences got introduced to an adult Jennifer Connelly. And there's even things to say about that. But Timothy Dalton's in it, of course. This is at a point when he was pretty much James Bond, Living Daylights and what was the License to Kill. Great cast, just tremendous cast. Bill Campbell delivers, has that boyish good look that happens. The Rocketeer, so much going for it. James Horner's score for the movie, particularly the soundtrack for this movie. In fact, just recently there was a reissue of the 2-disc version of it that Entrada put out, and boy, I was all fucking over that. Like I picked it up the instant that they announced it. I was like, I'll take that. That's fine. Thank you. Cause it is a stunning, the music in it, you'll hum the music forever. It's so beautifully, heroic, and it's heroic in such a, simple, bombastic way. It just, innocent way almost. And the movie takes place largely, has to deal with, obviously he's taking on the Nazis, so it holds up pretty well today because we're still dealing with that. But it takes place in 1938, and you have the character of Cliff Secord, who is, played by Bill Campbell. And he's this pilot, kind of down on his luck pilot, and he ends up finding this secret weapon that is a rocket jetpack. And at the time, you have to understand that in the 1990s, the 80s and 90s, the idea of jetpacks, it's been a big deal since the 60s, ever since, Sean Connery, strapped one on as James Bond. But, the idea of jetpacks was still like a dream. Like people still really wanted that, just like as much as they wanted flying cars. Today, I don't think people even really think that much about flying cars. But in the 80s and 90s, the future seemed like anything was possible. Like we were going to have wrist-mounted televisions in 1993. That didn't exactly happen. But, the idea that we would finally achieve a lot of these technological advancements, like that was, people were really on the pulse with that. They're really thinking about that and feeling that and wanting that. And so, the idea of a character where his whole superpower is the fact that he just has a jetpack, that was absolutely enough in the 1990s. And what's amazing about this film is that because even though it was made in the 90s, so the effects sometimes, the effects aren't exactly up to today's snuff, but what is? That even since the film took place in the 30s, you can watch it today and it still holds up because there's nothing in it that makes it a 90s film other than maybe some of the effects. But so what? It doesn't really matter. I don't think the effects matter so much because, the job of the entire production team on a movie is to make you not care whether or not it looks real or whether or not something is unbelievable or something like that. They need to suspend your disbelief, just enough. To where all of that's okay. So that doesn't require necessarily, the best effects in cinematic history. Not that it wasn't a cheap film or that it wasn't impressive effects for its day. It was certainly both. Or, it certainly bucked both of those. But yeah, The Rocketeer, this was kind of reinvigorating in playing off of, I think, Superman, the 78 Superman films, tagline of "You will believe a man can fly." And I think this is an updated attempt at that. I think that movie studios were starting to take, in the 90s, they were starting to think well ahead. And I think that they were thinking, okay, we've got to start getting into the comic books. This is what we need to start mining. We're already making all the classic novels into movies. Let's start mining comic books for story ideas. And I think that in many ways, The Rocketeer was made by Disney of all things. Okay. But I think it was very much meant to be kind of a test bed for how legit can we make a lot of the fantastic, a lot of things that would be required for superheroes. How legit can we make it look? Granted, they didn't own Marvel at the time, but they were still, shooting for it. So I think this is a very bold movie. I think that everything about it, there's, other than the effects not looking as great as today's effects, it is a perfect film. I don't think there's anything wrong with it. The story is solid. The villain, I think, is fairly well developed, so it doesn't fall prey to that comic book problem or comic book movie problem. Timothy Dalton he's Timothy Dalton. The guy's fucking amazing. He steals the camera every time the guy's on. Jennifer Connelly was stunning, brilliant, and absolutely stunning. In fact, one day, if any Sovereign Tech listener knows the answers around this, okay, one day I want to find out. I want to figure out what the fuck happened, okay, to Jennifer Connelly and Cameron Diaz, two people who are in two ballsy comic book movies, that being The Rocketeer for Jennifer Connelly and The Mask for Cameron Diaz. These women were absolutely voluptuous. I mean, and look, there's nothing wrong if people, want to have a thinner look or something like that. All that's fine. I'm not judging necessarily in that sense. I'm just saying, what the hell happened? Like, in fact, speaking of the Collider thing, Collider, the Rocketeer was really stupidly low on their list. I was really annoyed that it was, or high as a numerical count, like it was like number 29 or something like that. I don't know, I would not put it. It deserves to be way lower. But they were commenting on it, and the women at Collider were even saying, "Wow, Jennifer Connelly was hot." And right, that's my point. Is like, what the hell happened? Like, she in that movie, she has, look, I'll just say it. She has huge breasts. She has she has, for conventional terms, she has meat on the bones, the whole thing. Like, she's a voluptuous woman. She looks phenomenal. And her eyes, those ice blue eyes, kind of like, oh wow, that's Stacey Haddock, like what she had, in the first season of Sequest and Adventures of Superboy. Man, I mean, just hypnotic, she was so sexy. And I'm not saying she's not now. I'm just saying that, like, what happened inside of 10 years? Like, she turned into, please, I'm just using a conventional term. I mean, she just got I'll just say it that way. She just got very thin. She got like really, really thin, almost to the point of like, whoa, and that's okay. I'm not knocking anybody that looks like that. Because I love women in all shapes and sizes. It's just kind of weird. And Cameron Diaz, same thing. Cameron Diaz in The Mask, I mean, like, very voluptuous. Looked like she came right out of a comic book, And then the next thing you see her in, all of that is gone. And that's weird. I don't know if it's drugs or if they just had a certain look that they were going for. I mean, whatever the answer is, it's fine. It's just kind of weird. And I don't know. Hollywood is such a fucked up place that my concern is not that they look, like I said, I'm not saying they're ugly, quite the opposite. Now I'm saying that Hollywood is such a fucked up place that I'm just worried something happened. I'm worried that they got pressured into doing, I don't know what. It's such a strange thing, but anyway, that's getting into a whole other conversation. The Rocketeer, incredible. Absolutely incredible film. Totally watchable to this day. You can get like the 25th anniversary Blu-ray or something, and it's very enjoyable. There's nothing untoward in it. I mean, it's just a fun film, a lot of adventure, taking on Nazis, and it's really cool. Just the simple concept of giving a guy a jetpack and him becoming a hero. It's so nice to just have a simple idea like that, simple story like that, where just this average person just says, what, fuck it. I have a superpower now, or a super weapon, or, whatever. You have this amazing device, high-tech device. I'm going to do some good in the world. Like, I mean, that's I don't know. That's really cool. That's missing today, I think, in certain ways. So, Rocketeer at number 7. It could easily have been, could have been in the top 3, might have been in the top 3 if it wasn't for, a movie that came out this year, but we'll save that. So, Rocketeer from 1991, that's at number 7. Let's go to number 6. And at number 6, here's a movie that its importance is severely downplayed, and I think it's sadly forgotten when it does not need to be. Blade. Blade is, this movie came out in 1998. 1998 was such a tremendous year for films. It was definitely the 1982 and 87 of the 90s. 98 just so much. I mean, you could go to the movies almost every weekend, it seemed like, and you'd be seeing something fucking incredible, And Blade was one of those films. People forget about this. Stephen Norrington directed it, and David S. Goyer, who's, gone on to a tremendous career. He actually did it's loosely based on the comic book or the character from Marvel Comics, but it's there. And man, I mean, Stephen Dorff, Chris Christopherson's in it. Man, I love whenever Chris Christopherson's on camera, I go nuts. That guy is, I don't know how he's that slick, but I mean, he just oozes badass. Like, I'd never do anything to that guy. And I mean, I'm not like necessarily the biggest fan of his music, but I can appreciate it. And I just think it's tremendous. And of course, Wesley Snipes was him really coming off of top of his game, but still top of his game. We're still talking, Passenger 57, Money Train, White Men Can't Jump, things like that. I mean, still coming off of a lot of those films. Blade was, and he really embraced this character because I think only he could really do it. I mean, they even made a TV show later on TNT that only went one season of Blade. And not that the guy in that was bad, but he wasn't Wesley Snipes. Wesley Snipes just made this. I mean, he was just such a great actor. And I'm not saying he couldn't be now, but Wesley Snipes was such a great actor. I mean, Demolition Man, think of it all. He was such a great actor. I don't know how he did it, because some of the lines from the movie Blade, which of course is all about this, the Daywalker, right? The guy who's half vampire, half human, and he's trying to save humanity and everything. Him and his buddy Whistler, Chris Christopherson, of course. Some of the lines in that movie are really cool, but they are really cheesy. They are really cheesy. But the way he says them, they're so quotable, but the way he says them, you just believed it. You're like, yeah, no, yeah, yep. If he says it, I'm on board. Where he's talking to the, kind of the love interest in the movie, the woman doctor. When he says, the world you're living in is just a sugar-coated topping. When he's saying all that stuff, those are really cheesy lines. But man, you totally bought it. You're like, yeah, no, yeah, him, yep, Wesley Snipes can say that. Blade can say that, and it's real, and it's legit. And this movie had so much going for it. There was the kind of the appeal to history in it, that vampires have been around forever, and they have all these ancient writings and prophecies. I mean, it really was bringing in the sexy and cool factor. I mean, even Tracy Lords was in the beginning of it. Talk about sexy. It really kept all that alive in the vampire genre that unfortunately movies like Twilight would just ruin. I mean, Twilight has, in a very real sense, Twilight and the Vampire Diaries has really killed the entire vampire genre, which is a shame because it's probably the greatest. It's close to my favorite genre of film out there. I mean, I could watch Hammer films all day long. The Blade, look, this movie did so well, and it was such an underground hit because this was a cheap movie to make. This was not a big budget film. They did not expect it to do what it did. But this movie, bought into, allowed for two sequels, Blade 2 and Blade Trinity. And then, of course, there was the TV show. But the reason I think that this movie worked, it was totally down to one thing. It wasn't the special effects, which some of those were interesting for their day. Okay, like what would happen with Stephen Dorff's character. It wasn't so much the special effects. Yeah, the sword was cool. His car was cool. A lot of the gadgetry that he had and all that was really cool. What really made this work was the cool factor. I always say this. You absolutely cannot underplay levels of cool in anything that you create. Cool is so important, and yet it seems so intangible at times. But Blade had it. It had all the coolness in the world that you could possibly want. From the quotes, from, even, and now, again, it seems cheesy now, but you were told as soon as it happened, because you'd see it in the trailers and everything, and everybody kind of remembers the scene when Blade at the end is taking on the big bad guy. he catches his sunglasses are flying through and he catches them and puts them on, and then the music, kind of picks up and it just turns into total badassery, right? You bought it. You're like, oh yeah, oh, this guy's going to get fucked up now. As soon as he puts his sunglasses on, it was so cool. And that's the thing, like that cool factor, you can't put a price tag on that, because that'll take the smallest little film that you don't see coming and it will put it way over the top until it turns into an entire franchise. And that's exactly what happened with Blade. And Blade also, understand, I mean, a lot of people went to go see this because they knew at the very least it was a comic book movie. And like I said, we didn't have a lot of comic book movies at that point. And so everybody's like, oh, well, fuck. Yeah, okay. Oh, this is a Marvel character? Let's go. This is going to be great. Who knows? Maybe we'll see Captain America in it or something. Of course, you don't see anything like that. And it really, went on to exist in its own universe. But that was part of the excitement around this film. But this is another one where I don't think this doesn't get enough credit for how legitimate it made comic book movies. Because people accepted this and it did real money. And it was part of, similar to what, and obviously this movie's going to be on the list, so cat out of the bag, similar to what the X-Men movie would do, the first X-Men movie, where it would make comic book characters, these wild characters in wild situations, seem believable. Blade did the same thing. Might have even done it better in a way. But yeah, Blade, everybody forgets about this. That trilogy is so enjoyable. Blade 2, the funny thing about Blade 2, so Blade 2 would come out a couple years later. Blade 2 was the first movie that I watched where I said, you know what? That was too much action. And I can't believe I'd ever say that about a movie. But really, I thought Blade 2, too much action. It was nonstop. The movie, there was barely, the story was kind of interesting, but there was barely any story to it. It was just action, action, action. And it was cool. They played up that cool factor all the way, which still makes it enjoyable. Again, like I said, the cool factor, which is, the lightning in the bottle that me personally, I keep trying to, with everything that I make, that I try to capture. It's there, and that's what makes it serviceable. And that's what, allowed it to do money and allow for Blade Trinity. But yeah, that's a weird film because it just doesn't, there's points, it needs to stop. It needs to let you breathe, and it never did. Blade Trinity, interesting point. This really put Ryan Reynolds on the map. Look, folks, without Blade Trinity, you would have never had Deadpool. Deal with it. Deadpool is not on this list, by the way. I'll let you know that right now. I thought the movie was fine, very funny, but it not making the top 8. No way. I imagine it's probably, I mentioned Collider. They're doing their top 50. They still have like 5 to go, I think, or 4 to go. Deadpool's probably going to be on there. And look, Deadpool deserves credit for being the highest grossing R-rated film of all time. I mean, that's history making. But yeah, no. But anyway, but Ryan Reynolds, he's in Blade Trinity, and I think he's great in it. It's a shame that they didn't make more films. They really could have. Triple H was in it. Triple H, Degeneration X Wrestling. And I thought he was pretty cool in it. I like Blade Trinity, but yeah, that first Blade movie, easily one of the greatest, one of the greatest comic book movies ever made. And one of the most important ones that people keep forgetting about. But that sent a lot of market signals to studios saying, ooh, we should be making more comic book films. So there we go. Gotta hand it over to 1998's Blade. And Wesley Snipes, way to go, baby. I mean, you delivered. Okay, so let's go on to let's see. Would this be number 5? Number 5 is, and this is where maybe we get more into ranking. Number 5 for me is the 1989 Batman film. Of course, Tim Burton, just knocked it out of the park. Michael Keaton, awesome. This film, the importance of this film. This is a film, it's important for cinematic history. It's important for comic book movies in general. I wouldn't necessarily argue against that, but it's important to another genre, or really another venue. The 89 Batman film was very dark. Understand this. Batman before that was not. Batman was not very dark. Batman was sometimes campy. I mean, there were some dark storylines that would happen, but it wasn't what you got on the screen with Tim Burton's little masterpiece here. Okay. The 89 Batman changed Batman, like the comic book character. It changed the comic books. that, that Frank Miller, Dark Knight Returns, all that stuff, people want to talk about that, which would come out like 3 years previous. And certainly I think gave Tim Burton some license to go in a darker direction. But like Frank Miller's work, like most kids that liked Batman weren't buying into what Frank Miller was selling in 86 with Dark Knight Returns, right? But when the 89 Batman came out, oh yeah, now kids were buying this darker Batman, and now everybody's on board with this darker Batman. And now, then that's when it became a thing. So that's the interesting thing about, really, I don't always think that it works out this way where the movie, the comic book movie, actually does more to affect the comic books themselves, the comic books that it's based off of. But the 89 Batman definitely did that. One could argue the Iron Man, 2008 Iron Man did that because suddenly Iron Man became like a top tier character. But 89 Batman definitely did that. This was really, this movie stylistically, I know a lot of the effects don't necessarily hold up. But stylistically, I think this film is gorgeous. I love the wild sense. Danny Elfman's score makes everything come together, but I love the wild sense that Tim Burton gives it. I think that Jack Nicholson's Joker, which granted he's just acting like Jack Nicholson, I think Jack Nicholson's Joker is the Joker. Like, and I love Cesar Romero. I respect what, I certainly respect what Heath Ledger did, for the character. But at the same time, I'm annoyed by what Heath Ledger did for the character because, the Joker is meant to be like a sexy insanity almost. And I mean, Jack Nicholson just made that happen, man. Kim Basinger is Vicky Vale. I mean, just go down the list. This is a great movie. And I think it's still a great movie, and it's still really funny. The style is just slightly unreal that I think it still holds up, and this was a movie did such tremendous money in the box office. And I mean, let's talk about those box office numbers just to understand how big this is, and understand the bigger the film is, like this is one of those things that makes it legitimate. Okay, we can make movies about comic books, because before that was largely anathema. Okay, before, I mean, it was anathema in many ways, even before 2008, but certainly before 89, minus one particular film, it was kind of considered anathema. And I mean, here, look, when this came out June 23rd, 1989. Opening weekend, it did $44 million. 1989, think about $44 million in 1989. That's huge money, huge numbers. In fact, that for a long time, that was the top grossing weekend for any film. And it beat a movie that came out a week previous to it, which originally set the record, which was Ghostbusters 2, which did $30 million on its opening weekend. 1 week later, Batman comes out and beats that record. Okay, so Batman for a long time held the record of highest grossing opening weekend. I mean, again, that's how big this movie was. It would end up doing like 252 million, something like that, 250 million in America. That's not even international box office. And I think internationally it would, all told, it would do like $500 million, which again, 1989, that's crazy, crazy money. Now, yeah, we expect it. Now it's like, oh, well, sure, a movie's going to do a $100 million opening weekend. Of course, I mean, that's just run of the mill. That's fine. No. These numbers were crazy back then. In fact, speaking of the $100 million, this was the first movie to ever make $100 million within the first 10 days of its release. It was the very first film to do that. This was a big deal. People wanted to see that. And the interesting thing, too, is that a lot of people at the time, myself included, even at 8 years old, wanted to see this movie because we loved the 66 Batman TV series so much. It's like, ooh, we get a movie about Batman? Oh, that's going to be big, And so, we went to go see it for that. So, like, even there were so many different venues at play, so much different media at play, comic books, the TV show, the cartoons, whatever, that inspired people to go see this film. I think that's why it did so much big money, at first. Even though it was giving them a Batman that I think most people, minus some of the adults of the time that did appreciate Frank Miller's work, it was giving them a Batman that they'd never really experienced before. Like it was a new type of Batman, but it was that solid. And, Michael Keaton and Jack Nicholson just delivered, some of the best performances of their lives that made it work. And because of it, because of the amount of money it did, I think this was the real impetus of why you got experimental films. And I really do consider The Rocketeer an experimental film, why you started getting more experimental films in the comic book genre. Comic book movie genre that would come out because people are wondering, okay, how can we make this bigger and better? How do we make this, really happen? So Batman, of course, would go on to inspire, the 89 Batman would go on to inspire its own little universe that never really got to take off exactly. You had Batman Returns, which I have interesting history with that movie, but I'm not going to talk about it here. You have Batman Returns. You had Batman Forever, which I just love. Batman Forever, really made an amalgamation of the 66 Batman series and the 89 Batman movie. And I still think Batman Forever is such an underrated film. I think Val Kilmer delivers. I think it's tremendous. And also understand, that's the first time we got, Batman and Robin really was in Batman Forever. So, but then you get the movie, Batman and Robin, and then I still enjoyed that movie, but I get it. I understand people's, claims against it. And what's really a shame is that we were going to get, Chris O'Donnell. We were going to get a Nightwing movie. We were going to get Alicia Silverstone. Oh, Alicia Silverstone. We were going to get Alicia Silverstone, in a Batgirl movie. There was going to be this entire universe around the 89 Batman universe. The Joker was eventually going to be coming back, and I don't know if Jack Nicholson would have reprised or what, but that was a plan. There were a lot of plans because this was a money-making universe. This whole Batman universe that was getting built around the 89 Batman movie was a big deal. But Batman and Robin, it just tanked. I mean, everybody wanted to be, that's the thing. Uma Thurman, Arnold, all the big names that were in Batman and Robin, they asked to be in the film. They wanted to be a part of this amazing phenomenon that was going on, which was, the 89 Batman universe. And in fact, I'm not opposed to this. And mark my words, this is going to happen in the future. 10, 15, maybe next year. But, maybe in 2019. Somewhere, sooner or later, someone's going to make, just like they made a Batman 66 comic book that DC did, which is still one of the best. I mean, it's such an awesome series. I think someone's going to do an 89 Batman comic. I think that's going to happen. You're going to get the continuation of what goes on in that universe. You're going to get Batgirl and all that, and you're going to get the rubber nipples, the whole thing. And I can't wait for it. I'm going to love it. So just a hunch that's going to happen. But this series, this four-part series of films was, really the Marvel universe of its day. People don't get it. People don't understand just how huge this was. It was fucking massive. It was a juggernaut, and the 89 Batman made it all happen. And those movies, even when Batman and Robin tripped up, a lot of movies were already getting produced and in play, like X-Men and others, that would allow for, what we have, why we have so many comic book movies today. So the 89 Batman, really important film, also a very cool film, and did so much for the character of Batman, really. And, also understand, without the 89 Batman, guess what we would have never gotten? Batman the Animated Series, arguably the greatest cartoon of all time. We would have never gotten that. And so, thank your stars. That's how, like I said, this is a movie that influenced, from the top down, it was at the top and it just influenced everything. Every other venue, every other medium underneath it, it totally influenced it. I mean, just remarkable. That rarely ever happens. So, okay, let's continue on with the list. Going into number 4. This one might shock you. Again, this is where it's not so important, the numbers, because really I think 89 Batman is a better movie than this. But 2002 Spider-Man was by Sam Raimi, and of course Tobey Maguire, playing the title character. This was, I've never been a big Spider-Man fan, but I saw this movie, and when it came out, I was only a couple years removed really from high school. And when it came out, it's this is every high school nerd's dream. It appealed, it plucked those heartstrings, and I mean, it delivered. It had the romance, it had the comedy, it looked legit. The video games that started to come out around the series were incredible. and just the whole story. And man, I mean, Peter Parker, appeals so much to, because Peter Parker's kind of Bruce Wayne, but he's like the really young, nerdy, dorky Bruce Wayne in a way, depending upon which incarnation you're talking about here. This was massive. Now, this film isn't as important. Like, for some people, I think this would rank a little higher. This is another one that really allowed for, it existed in its own universe for various rights, copyright reasons, or rights ownership, license reasons, I should say. This is a movie that also, allowed studios to understand, holy shit, people really want comic book movies. This is a big fucking deal. We should be making these. Okay, this was very key to that. And of course, it would lead to 2 sequels that have varying quality based upon who you talk to. But this was the first, not the first. This was one of only a couple comic book movies that I can think of where it really put on display, like, I think, the entire human condition. It had everything. It had the laughter. It had the love. It had the, it had the heroism. The villain, you bought into the villain, it helps when Willem Dafoe is your actor. But the Green Goblin, you got it. And then, he has a son. This, James Franco's career took off from this. This has everything. This, it's very much a perfect film. Just remarkable. And actually controversy around it too, because in the original trailer for the film, the Twin Towers were in it, and they had to digitally remove them from the film, because 9/11 happened, a year later, or a year previous to its release. Just interesting stuff, but everybody involved in this was fantastic. Tobey Maguire, just unbelievable. I wish he would make some kind of a cameo maybe he did. I still have to watch Homecoming. Again, Spider-Man's not one of my favorite characters, so that's an impressive feat on its own. For me to go and see this film and just be so inspired, and have my mind just blown, that was, who would have seen that coming? I wouldn't have seen that coming, especially for a character that, in fact, I almost hate the character of Spider-Man. I'm really, really, really not a fucking fan. And I think in the comics, he's often annoying, but somehow Tobey Maguire, Sam Raimi, they just pulled it off. This was not annoying. This was inspirational. And has some of the greatest quotes in cinematic history, great power comes great responsibility and all that. It was really cool. So yeah, can't take anything away from Spider-Man. Definitely deserves to be in any top 10 list, just for what it did for the genre. And just the fact that it's such a solid movie on its own. It's just, it really, it touches every human emotion, I think. There's even points where it's sexy, when he's hanging down to get the kiss from Mary Jane. That was hot. It was hot. Oh, I loved it. If you're a teenager or just out of being a teenager or something, when this came out, you know exactly what I'm talking about. This movie was phenomenal for its time, and I've watched it again recently, and it's still solid. It's still very good. So okay, so now we're into our top 3. This is where the rankings actually matter. Okay, this is where 3, 2, 1 are. There's actually a hierarchy here. Number 3 has to go to this movie. Well, we'll talk about it, and I've already mentioned it and said kind of what it's done for the comic book industry, the industry, but also for the comic book movie genre. X-Men, the year 2000, when this came out, this was just incredible. Like I said, really Blade before it, which had come out 2 years before, would really would allow people to realize, hey, you can actually make comic book characters look really legit. They can look like they belong in the real world and do their thing. And they can say all this crazy shit, and they can exist in this crazy world that the average person doesn't realize is out there. And it works. You can sell it and it works. So, Blade kind of paved the trail for that. But X-Men in the year 2000, man, for so many reasons, for so many reasons. So I was in high school when this movie was going to be coming out, and I'd read the magazine was called Cinescape, And it was kind of the periodical that you would go to find out all about all the dorky shit coming out. Like the first time I heard that The Matrix was going to be a thing was in, the pages of Cinescape. It was a genre magazine, that would cover science fiction, fantasy, all that. And, when they were announcing and keeping up with the news about X-Men coming out, I was like, they can't do this. And I remember saying to my friends, it's like, here's the number one problem with this whole thing. Okay, an X-Men movie, we want it. Like, we're just getting done with the 92 X-Men cartoon and everything, that, which was also one of the greatest cartoons of all time. How are they going to make, it showed that you could bring X-Men to, I mean, granted that was animated, but you could bring it to a motion genre of sorts, and it could work. But how are they going to make this into a movie? How do you make, here's the thing, you can draw Wolverine. But how do you make, how do you cast Wolverine? Like, how do you get somebody, how do you make that look legit? How do you make that look real? And Hugh Jackman comes in and just go, Jesus fucking Christ, that's Wolverine. And now he's been playing Wolverine for 15 years. And it's such a great paycheck. And, wow. That is, that alone gives this film because at the time in the 90s, Wolverine was like the embodiment of the attitude of the 90s. Just this really gruff, badass, animalistic, extreme character. He was everything that anybody in the 90s, like, you wanted to be Wolverine. Didn't matter if it wasn't your favorite character. Like, yeah, I want to be Wolverine. Fucking adamantium claws, the whole thing. You wanted, he was so badass. And so everybody was wondering, how the hell do you turn this into, how do you make this real? Like, how do you make this look good? And that is why X-Men is so amazing. I mean, the story is good. The script is great. Bryan Singer's directing is phenomenal. Patrick Stewart, of course. I mean, the role is pretty much tailor-made for him, Patrick Stewart as Professor X, fantastic. Ian McKellen. Ian McKellen did great as Magneto. I think of Magneto as more of a sexy character. Yeah, he has gray hair, but he's like younger and a lot more bulky, a lot of a bigger guy. I don't mind Ian McKellen's performance at all, but I would have casted that part differently. But everything else, I mean, Famke Janssen, as Jean Grey, Halle Berry as Storm was perfect. I mean, Rogue was kind of a miss. Anna Paquin as Rogue. I mean, she did fine. But Rogue was another one, kind of like, another one of those embodiments of the 90s where I think we didn't need a teenage Rogue. We needed Rogue. We needed sexy Rogue. And we never really got Psylocke until, over a decade later, sadly. So there's a lot, the bulk of the complaints about this movie, often fall to, okay, Rogue was, yeah, we wish we had a different Rogue and we want all of our other characters in there, but it didn't matter. Like, it somehow made as ridiculous an idea as the mutant revolution and everything was in, when you think about it outside of comic books, as ridiculous as that was, as ridiculous as the uniforms were that we knew the X-Men, or we were used to the X-Men wearing and everything, somehow it made it all work. It all came together in this movie where, nope, okay, yeah, they wear those outfits. Okay, that makes sense. And they even cracked jokes about like yellow spandex and everything. It was funny. But the uniforms worked. The Blackbird, all of it absolutely worked. Like, it was believable that, yes, this is what's going on. There's mutants. This is the deal. And there is this team of mutants known as the X-Men that they're saving the fucking day. And you just bought it. And it just, like, it said, yeah, this is totally legit. Like, this fits. My suspension of disbelief is well suspended. And it would go on to do great money. And obviously it's created a very interesting, franchise with its ups and downs, that being the X-Men franchise, which of course now Disney owns. But that said, even though the franchise would kind of have its ups and downs, this is the movie that made Iron Man possible. This is the movie that, while it didn't usher in the modern comic book, movie mania that's going on right now, it was definitely its most direct progenitor. Okay. As in, it's what allowed for people to think, oh, well, yeah, comic book characters, no matter how ludicrous or ridiculous, they could they could actually work in the real world. Like this could happen, you know, and that's really X-Men's strength. But you know, it was a movie that had a great villain. Magneto was fantastic, you know, among everybody else involved with it. I think that the script was great. The music was also, you know, was top notch, which was interesting because I remember at the time I was like, oh, Michael Kamen finally got another job, you know, because I was used to him scoring Highlander, but that was about it. So the music was cool for it. Everything about it was just, and it hit that cool factor. It did a great job of hitting that cool factor. It was really something. I mean, yeah, just a great movie, and just as important, I think, as what will end up being our, in a way, I mean, as far as like impact, if we were judging it on impact, if somebody called it number one, I could understand that, because this really, like, this finally crossed the boundary where it said, okay, if we can make Wolverine work in live action, we can do anything. And that's what this movie brought on. So, okay, but let's go on to our number two. But like I said, the number one film, you know, I mean, you could argue back and forth, but we'll talk about that when we get to the number one film. Let's get to the number two film. And this is a movie I've watched over and over again a few times now. And it was a movie that came out this year. And maybe you could say, well, isn't that a little early to be calling something the number two greatest comic book genre or movie or film of all time? You know, if it's only been out for a few months, frankly, you could argue that, but I think that this is the movie it'll never be fully explained why it didn't get made until now. What the fuck took so long? It's not like it's a character that needed that much special effects to come off as believable and legit. Why the hell didn't this happen before? Of course, we're talking about Wonder Woman. You know, Gal Gadot, fuck yeah. You go, girl. That was brilliant. Even though, would she have been my first choice? Look, I loved her in the Fast and Furious movies, one of my favorite franchises, but, you know, would I have casted her? No. Would I still change it? Maybe. but she delivered. I mean, she made it happen. She made it hers. She made it believable. She made it work. I mean, and, you know, what else can be said about fucking, you know, Patty Jenkins? I mean, she made this believable. She made it very clear. I've done full reviews on this, which are available on my YouTube channel. You know, if you want to check it out, but so I'm not going to spend a ton of time on it because I have spent so long reviewing it, but man, like, this hit all the right notes, except for the one thing that will always keep it from being number one is the villain sucked. The villain was very underwhelming. In this movie. So I'll give it that. The villain was very, very underwhelming. So it falls prey to that. But, you know, Chris Pine as Steve Trevor, fantastic. The music overall, you know, Rupert Gregson Williams, who I didn't really know his work outside of this that well, was, I mean, that's such unique themes and everything that's going on with it. And he made use, of course, of some of the stuff that Hans Zimmer had created for the character for Batman v Superman. But, you know, I mean, that's impressive too, to come out of this character initially being introduced in Batman v Superman, which is not a highly regarded film, for this to be as great as it was coming out of that. Woo, man. That's a feat. But yeah, this worked. And so many people, I remember, and even I was a little skeptical. It's like, oh, what's with all the World War I stuff, you know? But it just worked. It worked for the film. It made it all believable. And having that time frame that, you know, that Wonder Woman's been around, you know, makes sense now. This is, I mean, Wonder Woman, I've reviewed in previous comic book top eights, not comic book movies, but in comic book top eights for comic books in general. I've talked about how Wonder Woman, look, when she shows up on the panel, in a comic book, not a movie, but in a comic book, when she shows up, the seriousness level, the you know, the excitement level of everything, I mean, it goes up, you know, I mean, exponentially. It just goes way up. You know, you're ready to go. As soon as she shows up, I mean, she makes everything, you know, deadly serious and exciting. I mean, it's there. And to have a whole movie with her now, phenomenal. And it worked. I mean, for all the obvious reasons, it really worked. I'm still a huge fan of, you know, don't mistake me, I'm still a huge fan of Linda Carter. I'm a huge fan of the 77 Wonder Woman series. Huge fan of that. But obviously these are two very different animals, and what an animal. Yeah, Wonder Woman. And as I've said before, like even with Justice League, because I reviewed that recently and I thought that didn't really live up to things. When she was on screen, it was great. Really, and this could be like a blessing in disguise for DC. If, it being set in World War I, if DC decided, hey, we're going to make Wonder Woman her own franchise and we're just going to kind of ignore that she was a part of anything else. If they did that, like I'd be okay with that. In fact, I think they should. I think Wonder Woman should be a completely standalone universe and have it grow out much like what Batman was, the 89 Batman was originally going to do. And I think that would be the best possible thing that could happen for this character, because this movie is too good to be hindered by a larger universe. It's too fucking good. Patty Jenkins came right out and said, she said, I based the cues of this film off of the 78 Superman. And it shows. Because, well, let's get to number one. You know what it is. The 78 Superman. Woo! Now, I'm not going to spend a ton of time on this because I've reviewed this movie probably multiple times, or I've at least talked about it over and over again on Sovereign Tech Prime. So no need to do all of that. But let's just make it clear. In fact, speaking of that Collider list, this was like number 6 on their list. That's fucking insulting. Like, in fact, some of the guys are like, okay, I'm walking out. Like, if this isn't number 1, I'm walking out. And I agree. This is it. This is the granddaddy. This is the comic book movie. It's what started it all. It's what continues to be all. I mean, it's just, it is it, Yeah, it doesn't look as flashy, as a modern comic book film. Sure, it doesn't have an entire universe kind of built around it, even though this did, spawn its own sequels, which, there's a lot of history around that. Of course, Superman Returns, Superman 3, Superman 4, we're going to restart the canon with this. I mean, but that's how big, understand, that's how big of a movie this was, is that Bryan Singer thought that, the guy that brought us X-Men, in, 2005 or whenever, thought that he could actually restart this universe, the 78 Superman movie universe, that he could restart it, pretend that 3 and 4 never happened, and bring, has Brandon Routh come in as Superman or whatever, and still has a very weak Lois Lane, sadly, because I love Lois Lane, such a great character, and has Kevin Spacey, which obviously wouldn't be using him anymore, but have Kevin Spacey come in as Lex Luthor to replace Gene Hackman, which Kevin Spacey, whatever. It's not Gene Hackman, but that's how seminal this movie is that it seemed important enough 30 years later to try and reboot this universe, to give it a shot. And they made, at the time, Superman Returns was the most expensive film ever made, $250 million or something. It had the largest budget ever. That's how much they thought that this was going to take off. And not that Superman Returns is necessarily a bad film, but yeah, I mean, it wasn't the return to form that we expected with, Richard Donner's, 78 Superman and Superman 2, which I do recommend watching the Richard Donner cut of Superman 2 if you never have. Makes it a far more interesting film. Not that it was bad in the first place. But anyway, so the 78 Superman, I mean, this is the one, like every other comic book movie has to kiss this movie's ass. And that's how it is. And that's why it is number 1, and it'll always be number 1. And in fact, it'll always beat Wonder Woman for one fact alone, is that, I mentioned Gene Hackman as Lex Luthor. You totally get it. Even though you don't get a whole ton of backstory about Gene Hackman as Lex Luthor, it just works. Like, you kind of get it, and Gene Hackman's performance is just so solid, you accept it. It's like, oh yeah, no, he's the bad guy in town. This is how it goes. And he has such a wild plan, and he lays it out, and there's so much humor, and you get so much depth to the character of Lex Luthor and his other cohorts, Miss Teschmacher and and Otis, right? But yeah, I mean, so it doesn't fall prey to that problem. It doesn't fall prey to any of the problems that any comic book movie gets into. The effects for its day were top-notch, were phenomenal. They totally suspended your disbelief. The music, it's John Williams. Enough said. You got John Williams to score your superhero movie. You're having a good day. And obviously one of the greatest themes of all time, superhero or not. Amazing. Absolutely amazing. This film hits every note. It's funny. It's romantic. There's points where it's over the top. There's points where you feel, there's points where you get angry. There's points where you get, go to the depths of sadness, with what happens when Lois dies. Oh man, it doesn't matter how ridiculous anything in the film is. This movie makes it work. This movie puts it together as a complete whole. And, I say this often because most people don't realize it. This movie is widely regarded as the last American classic, and it deserves it. It deserves it because it was the turning point when, even more so than Star Wars, it was the turning point when suddenly you thought you could see anything on screen, and you're just like, wow, yeah, and I'll buy it. I'll be like, yeah, that's great. That's awesome. And for a character, Superman arguably is kind of one-dimensional. For a lot of people, I think they see him as just the goody two-shoes. And that's the other impressive feat that this movie pulled off is that, that whole scene, which is my favorite scene when Lois dies and he, flies up and spins the earth the other way around to turn back time and everything. And, it's a logistical nightmare, but you got to see a really angry Superman, and it was awesome. And not just an angry Superman, but a sad Superman, a very sad. Yeah, I know. I talk about that scene all the time because it's just so powerful. Like when he just so gently touches her face when she falls over. Oh my God. Oh, I have goosebumps just thinking about it. And of course, very recently on the show, I did a review of the 3-hour version of the film, which came out on Blu-ray, and it doesn't need it. Doesn't need the 3-hour cut. But there's nothing too much wrong with the 3-hour cut either, other than it might get to the point where it's a little too schlocky, a little too many jokes. But yeah, this is the movie. You knew that's what I was going to pick. There was no way. In fact, it's insulting whenever this isn't number one. I don't care if the effects don't live up to what today has. The story absolutely does. The humor is still goddamn hilarious. I would have cast somebody else as Lois Lane, but not going to take anything away from Margot. And it's awesome. And Christopher Reeves, that's Superman. He's the measuring stick. It doesn't matter how good they look. Henry Cavill, Dean Cain, take your pick. Every one of them is going to get compared to Christopher Reeve, and every one of them is going to fail. Every one of them is going to fail because they're the best. He's the best. He was, and I'm glad that he got to, play a cameo role on Smallville. That was really nice to have that because, damn it, he's Superman. Man, yeah. So 78 Superman. It's number one because it's the first. You're either the first or the best. Sometimes you're both. And I think the 78 Superman is both. It was the first real comic book movie. And it was, it's still the best. I think it's still the best. I think it still holds up. In fact, hell, I want to watch it with Stephanie tonight. We got to crank out the 3-hour version. I think she and I, it's such a cool film. And especially and I think it still holds up. And I hear from a lot of people who say, oh yeah, they show it to their kids and the kids love it. The kids just think, whoa, that's so wild, and it's because it puts on display in a very palatable fashion, again, the entire experience of the human condition. I think, you've got it all. You've got the anger, the sadness, the love, the heroism, the villainy, you've got it all. It's a movie that has it all and just damn funny. So anyway, that's it for our top 8 of live action. I guess I should say more particularly our live action comic book movies. There's others that could have made this list. Some of them being questionable whether or not you wanted to consider them comic book movies. Conan the Barbarian could have made this list because really that was based off of not of Robert Howard's books, but more based off of the Marvel comics of Conan that were very popular in the 70s. That could have easily been in the top 8 if you wanted to count that as a comic book movie. Valerian, which came out this year, somewhere down the line, I think that could end up in like a top 10 list, but that's going to take time for people to realize just how great that movie is. But I wouldn't have minded it being in my top 8. Then, of course, the Ninja Turtle movies. Ninja Turtles were originally a comic, but it's another situation like Conan where really like the inspiration for the film wasn't really the comic books. It was more, the movies were more around the cartoon, and the cartoon is what really set the tone. Tank Girl. I love that movie. It's such an offbeat, weird ass movie, and I mean, yeah, I would have loved to included it. Tank Girl is one of my favorite comic books. But honorable mention for Tank Girl, because really there's no reason. If I had a top 10, it'd be in there, but not in a top 8, I guess. So because it didn't really, I mean, yeah, it brought Tank Girl to life and it was great in how it did so in many ways, but like it didn't do any, like, I don't know that it inspired anything beyond that, other than I think it did get a lot of people to start reading the comic book. So I guess that's, it's got that going for it. G.I. Joe, Rise of Cobra. So G.I. Joe, how did that start, right? Did it start as a comic, or did it start as a toy line, or did anybody really not care? Did anybody even care until the cartoon series came out? That's the hard part with G.I. Joe, and I'm a huge G.I. Joe fan, and it's really tough to say because they're really symbiotic. Like all three of those things kind of came into fruition at once, and that was the point, and that's why it was so successful in its day. I thought that the movie G.I. Joe: Rise of Cobra was tremendous. I thought it was a great film. That was absolutely live action G.I. Joe. That is absolutely if I was a kid, what I imagine live action G.I. Joe looking like. Bingo, you hit it. You got it. Nice job. But yeah, so that could have made the list, but that's questionable whether or not you want to call that a comic book movie. I will give, if there was a movie zero, and this is just on a personal level, The Mask, which also very loosely based off of a Dark Horse comic. The Mask is a movie in the 90s that I watched over and over and over and over again. Like I would literally, I mean, I don't know how many copies of the tape, there were no DVDs, folks, how many copies of the tape that I warped because I just kept watching it over and over again as a kid growing up. Kind of plays off of what Spider-Man, the 2002 Spider-Man was hitting at, where, it's the zero to hero, right? That was even the marketing line for the movie. That movie, fantastic soundtrack for one. Jim Carrey was top of his game and could sell anything at that point. It was such a fun and I think very sexy film. I mean, Cameron Diaz, phenomenal. It was such a fun and sexy film and kind of weirdly dark at points. It all came together. A movie like that shouldn't have worked, but it worked, and it was just hugely inspirational to me. As soon as I had the means, I went out and I bought, a whole yellow zoot suit, the whole thing. I mean, I was like, I've to this day, I'm really obsessed with that movie. I still listen to the soundtrack. And I don't mean the score. I mean, the score is fine, fairly simplistic, but the score is fine. But like the full-on soundtrack, Cuban Pete and stuff from Domino and Tony that's on there. I think even, is K7 on there? I'm pretty sure K7's on there. I mean, there's just, that's a fun, jazzy, swingy soundtrack. It's really cool. So if there was a movie zero in my top 8, it would have to go to The Mask, but that's totally on personal preference. I get it why other people might not find that movie so cool. But I thought that movie was like, I remember seeing that and my jaw was just on the floor, much like, The Mask's jaw would drop to the table. I was so in awe of how great that movie was. And, watched it over and over and over again, because, and I think that movie hits because, again, this is that zero to hero thing, because, Stanley Ipkiss, the character in the film, really got to get payback on all the people that kicked him around, and me growing up, especially at that time, I was a little nerdy kid getting picked on all the time, all the time. I wasn't the big guy yet, I wasn't the golden stallion yet. And, wasn't even the king of the nerds yet. And so that, like, I think that movie, like, that was a fantasy come true. It's like, yeah, good. All I got to do is put on that mask and then finally these people can get what's coming. You know what I mean? Without really killing anybody. That was kind of nice too, is that he didn't exactly kill anybody in the movie. That was, yeah. Get a proctologist standing by. You heard me. The best one you can find. I love that. I can quote that movie almost word for word. It's so much fun. So yeah, honorable mention, of course, to Tank Girl and The Mask, products of their time, certainly. And I think they also show where studios were willing to get experimental with, because I think The Mask is totally an experimental film and a special effects, milestone, actually, with a lot of like the facial special effects and whether people would buy it, and they did, that were done in that. That I think that's a milestone film as far as special effects go. Man. So Mystery Men, I don't think that was ever actually a comic. I would love to mention that. Like Cool World, that was never really a comic book, but I love that movie and talk about a great soundtrack. There's a lot of these films that were either quasi comic book or were actual comic book films that were very experimental throughout the 90s that shouldn't be forgotten, that are out there, that I think are really, really great. They're not in the top 8. I mean, they can't be said to have like helped create the entire, comic book movie genre, but they're out there. I'm glad that they're out there, and I still watch them here and there. So anyway, okay, really, that is it. That is your Sovryn Top 8 live action comic book movies. Going to have more Top 8s coming out for you quite a bit throughout this month. And then, of course, we got a bunch of others. There's so much content, you're not even going to know what to do with yourself. I'm always amazed. I get it that some people have to cancel because they have financial troubles or something. But, really, I lose people that are paying out $1. What I'm putting out there isn't worth $1 to you. No, I don't mind. It's really fine. So whatever. Anyway, I will, more content coming out this week, and I got some really special stuff, some good times with good friends coming up too. So I will see you on the other side. Woo!